Díogúid go léir cóide agus tá fáilte ród. Welcome to my story with me, Mary Honan, on Lyra Media. And today my lovely guest it's very complicated. Elizabeth Young Collins is her name, but her stage name, she goes by Elizabeth Young. I have a thespian on the program today, another thespian to add to the other lists. Hello, Elizabeth, all the way there in Indiana.
Hello. It's a pleasure to be here and a privilege.
It's an absolute privilege and pleasure for me too. But I was saying off camera, Michael Jackson country, Indiana.
Okay. Well, as I mentioned, I could think more of David Letterman. His mother died at the nearby town. Also, Larry Bird, the basketball player. I am not specifically a fan of football, but one of the reasons people move to Indiana, besides a great job, which is why I came here with my husband, since I am married and I got married late in life and I wanted to hold on to him, and vice versa.
Do as little as possible and say as little as possible negative because you have to go outside your door and you have to live with him.
No, but I mean, when he said to me, we were in Maine on a vacation at this beautiful resort, Bethel Inn, where I've gone not only by myself but with Irish people and British people, taking them on tour. This is another career I took on, plus the singing. And anyway, my husband, we're in Bethel Inn, Maine, and he says, "How would you like to move to Indiana?" All I had remembered from Indiana was that it was a flat land. And I remember driving through it when I was younger. So I was not thrilled at the possibility, but I knew that it was time for him to have his dream because I've been living my dream, doing what I love for over 20 years as a singer, professional singer. And after I get married to him, then 3 years into that, he's asked me if I could do something to supplement. So I became a tour director and learned about the history of the United States. So I've been doing that, of course, before COVID. My dream, however, is to continue to do what I found out I had talent doing, which is to write stories. And I learned this in high school with a wonderful teacher. However, I let it go because my mother is, I think, concerned that I would just be writing to myself in my room and never get out and have friends and have a social life. So at any rate, I wasn't really encouraged to become a writer. The other writer in our family was a messy housekeeper, and my mother didn't like her. So at any rate, I moved to Indiana with my husband so that he could have his dream come true.
And that was lovely. That was lovely, Elizabeth.
Very nice of me, I think, yes.
Very conciliatory of you.
Well,
I mean, people did it years ago and that, but not so much in the last, I suppose, 20 years. People are always, there's two people working in a household, and it takes a lot of guts to actually say, I'll put my dreams on hold now for the man I love.
Well, thank you. And I did feel that a bit of resentment, to be honest, when I first moved here, and then someone said, "Well, if you want to go to be with other artsy fartsy people, go to Indianapolis." So I went to Indianapolis and volunteered. The point is, I started writing because I realized I could write my own one-woman show, which I always wanted to do. So
Yeah.
I left the work that I had busily been doing in Boston and in Braintree, where we lived, and moved to Indiana. And because there was, a whole open canvas, I ended up writing and performing my first show. And I sent you a link to that. My first show was called, Why Be Normal When You Really Are Extraordinary?
Oh, that is a fantastic, but aren't we a particular breed of people, us arty-farty people? They're as you call them, and quite rightly so. We don't, I don't think we're odd or anything like that. It's just that we're, I suppose, highly creative people, and creative people will always find an outlet for that creativity, whether it's through in COVID has given creative people the ability to find another avenue for their creativity. Mightn't be the avenue that they've always had, but when you have that creative vibe within you, it'll always find an outing some way.
Yeah.
You find being a creative person has helped you to get through COVID.
That and music,
And
singing.
that's the
I
creative.
was, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, that's true. But I mean, having music, being exposed to music when I was young, growing up, we used to sing in the car. My mother had a lovely voice. My uncle Ezra used to sing on the radio in Boston from the Brimmer Street Episcopalian Church. So music was something really important. And my father even sang, I didn't realize this till much later after he died. He sang in a glee club, I guess, at his private school. So, yes, my story is basically I grew up with two remarkable parents, and they had five children. And Gordon Parks, one of the biggest historians for Black American history, also worked for Time Life magazine. Gordon Parks came to Pennsdale, Pennsylvania before I was born and took photographs of my father helping my brothers build a car out of aluminum from scratch, my mother baking her famous oatmeal bread, my brothers playing with their little toes on the bunk bed in the house that my father designed and built. And I was not born yet. So I wasn't born until like 4 or 5 years later. And I said to my mother, why didn't you wait for me to be born? But they got into Time Life magazine. Gordon Parks came to Pennsdale and photographed one of the big baby boomer families in America. And so I was born into what was already a famous family, if you will. My mother would show me these pictures of these newspaper of the magazine clippings, and so I looked up to and adored my parents. And my father was a bomber pilot in World War II,
Yeah.
and he fought, of course, against the Nazis.
Nice.
So just fast forward 1986, I moved to Boston, and my mother said to me, who had the story in the family was I was too smart for my own good. And I think in those days, in the 50s and 60s, well, this is some of the things I was told. I hope you marry somebody smarter than you. You're too smart for your own good. Let him win. Let him win in tennis. Their egos can't take it if you don't let them win. Things like that. So, and of course,
I could never let anybody win if I try. I'd have to. I'm very competitive,
right.
And I'm even competitive with myself, and it really aggravates me. I've always been involved, I suppose, in Irish dance competitions, and anything I do, I have to have an end result. And I have to reach that result. And if I fall short, I get really annoyed with myself. So I think I'd be, if I was playing tennis with somebody, it would kill me to let them win.
Well, I didn't ever follow her advice. As a result, I didn't get married till much later in life.
Well, that's probably why I'm not married.
Well, anyway, the only reason I'm doing what I love is I had to learn to marry myself first. So, but it was just the point is that there's this accommodating, comedy. So part of I'm writing now my fifth play, Mary, and I want to say Dr. Honan because
Call me Mary.
Okay. So it's very exciting, and it's a story, the play that I'm writing now, and that is remarkable. The point is, I moved to Indiana. It seems like it was a sacrifice for my husband, but he had always had, I wasn't always paying very much towards our mortgage in our house, so he has been very supportive of my dream. So that's why we moved here, and now I started doing what I really love, which is, as well as singing, of course, which is to write. So I wrote my first show called Why Be Normal When You Really Are Extraordinary.
Welcome to my show. Everything that you're about to hear is absolutely true, except for the parts that are not. The show is called Why Be Normal When You Really Are Extraordinary? Well, it's a trick question. You are what you are. You can't help it. Easy for me to say on stage, here I am. But honestly, all I ever wanted to be was normal, accepted, to fit in to my large family, to measure up to my parents, and in trying to do so, to be someone else who I thought they wanted me to be, which is basically a wife. In trying to be that, I basically became a poster child of low self-esteem. And I only ever, though, wanted to have a dream. I had a dream of singing, just like I am tonight, or will be, on stage with you tonight. So how did I get here? Let's start at the very beginning. A very good place to start. I was born into the fold of 5 siblings and 2 loving parents. My father was an Army Air Corps captain and a bomber pilot in World War II. He earned a Purple Heart. My mother was a beloved wife from a well-to-do family in Minnesota, where she learned the expression, okie dokie. Fly the ocean on a silver plane. See the jungle when it's wet with rain. But just remember till you're home again, you belong to me.
And that was a story about how I was constantly measuring myself, not so much up against myself, but against my parents, thinking my father he went to MIT, one of the most prestigious, difficult colleges to get into. He was a bomber pilot in World War II. My mother came from a fine family in Minnesota, and they were barons.
I was going to say robbing banks.
I was going to say robber barons, but they were captains.
I was going to say robbing banks.
They do. Not that I know of. Although my grandfather said there may have been some of that.
But tell me, Elizabeth, where's your husband is obviously Irish American,
Right.
and
So his great grandmother came over apparently through Ellis Island, and he was trying to find her. We went to New York in July and went over to Ellis Island to find her information. So yes. So when we went to Ireland, which was some time ago now, we ended up catching. It seemed like everybody we met was related to the Collins clan. So,
well, it's a pretty common name in Ireland. If you, as they say, if you spit, you'd hit a Collins somewhere.
and we went to Michael Collins Museum.
Yeah.
So my joke is, my mother said to me one time, because she had 7 of us children, and so she came up to me, I was about 10 years old, and she said, if anybody ever asks you if you're Catholic, you just tell them you're the next best thing. I said, what's that, Mom? Episcopalian.
So you were brought up Episcopalian.
I was.
I was interested to know that, because young is I was trying to work out the young part of your name. Your father's people were obviously young. Your mother's side were
Merrill.
Was it? Pardon?
Merrill. MERRILL. Merrill, like Merrill Lynch. Yeah.
Where was the connection with the Holocaust on your aunt's side?
Yeah, thank you. All right. Very good point. So I moved in 1986 to Boston. And my mother said, and I'm back to where I was, she said, I'm glad you're moving to Boston. Your Aunt Eve lives there, and she's an intellectual, and she will understand you. So I moved to Boston, and she was a widower. My Uncle Ezra had died. She married my Uncle Ezra, a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, lived in Beacon Hill. So here she is, a Holocaust survivor, has come to the United States. Her first husband she married and died. He died. He was part of the Occidental Petroleum dynasty, but he died of some kind of heart disease. So she moved to Boston, and she met my Uncle Ezra, who married her at age 50. So Ezra was 50 years old. He marries Eve, who's very sophisticated and beautiful and thin. My mother is very jealous about. Oh, she's thin as what did she say? She's as skinny as all get out, or something like that. Anyway, my Uncle Ezra married Eve at age 50. So my mother and I we're in the kitchen in Pennsylvania. Boston, we're in Pennsylvania. My mother whispers, maybe he's not gay. No, I think
You thought your uncle was gay. and marrying
Well,
your
he
aunt.
had a very wonderful partner, friend, whose name was King Price, who these people have all passed away. But at any rate, yeah, but my Uncle Ezra was one of the presidents of the Hood Milk Company, which is a big, Hood Milk Company in Boston, Massachusetts, in New England. So I believe at that time he probably was not, did not feel comfortable coming out in those days, especially as he was in a prominent position in Boston society. And he had
Sad,
gone,
sad, really. But he had a happy marriage anyway to
well,
Eve.
they were very good friends. She loved him very much. She told me stories about how he was so busy working, she would go to his office. One time she made an appointment with a different name. So, the secretary calls her in and to my Uncle Ezra, her husband, and Ezra looks at her and says, Eve, what are you doing here? She said, I had to make an appointment. Otherwise, I would never get to see you. So she went to his office.
What part
But
of Europe was she from, Elizabeth?
Amsterdam, yeah. And
Holland.
her only brother, Yop, and her parents both were killed. But when I was only 11, that was when my Uncle Ezra got married to her, right? I was only 11, and we came to Boston, and my Uncle Ezra said, don't ever ask her any questions about the Holocaust. And when I did so I came to Boston in 1986, had lots of wonderful talks with her, and she did say, when I gave her a happy Hanukkah card one time, she opened it up very slowly, and I should go get my glasses and show you what she said. She peered over her glasses and said, you know, you are the only member of the family to acknowledge that I am Jewish. Then she slowly closed the card and put it away. And now I think it was her way of she was glad maybe that I acknowledged it.
Yeah.
She lived in, Beacon Hill. Are you familiar with Beacon Hill? It's where
Well, I've heard of it, but I haven't been
they
to it.
called it Snob Hill, where the people live up on Beacon Hill. But anyway, it's where the Boston Brahmins lived. So, it's primarily Protestant, although, of course, there was a black community there, etc. So, when people were singled out, well, you know more than I do about that, but I certainly studied because I do go to the Holocaust Museum in DC with my student tour groups.
Yeah, a lot of people changed their names when they went to the United States. They anglicized, I suppose, their names, or especially in show business and that, because they were afraid of being immediately recognized as being Jewish, and therefore under some form of threat, if you like, or they still weren't used to the idea that they could live in a country without their Jewishness being something that was to be feared, because I mean, it was they were just terrible times. And I know your aunt suffered greatly from post traumatic stress, which manifested itself in the fact that she suffered survivor guilt.
Yes, right. So thank you for
Encourage
bringing
you
that.
to go to psychiatry or to go to a psychologist in order to get a man.
That song, I need a man to make me happy. I really needed to get myself. I needed to figure out what was going on. See, my parents were remarkable people. They were beautiful, generous, kind, loving, and they did have a disease, which well, I'll just tell you this. My mother said before she died, I'm sorry, I never realized how much my drinking hurt my children. And we all sat in the front pew of the church that day, my sister Janny, my sister May, and myself, and my mother, and we were all crying. I don't think we knew why we were crying, but I guess we were asking for forgiveness. But at any rate, I had talked to them about how I felt about their drinking. So they were what they call high functioning alcoholics. And I didn't realize it until I went to therapy. And the only reason I went to therapy is that my Aunt Eve had sort of taken me under her wing. I'm now in Boston. My parents are off traveling and partying, and they've retired, but they were really not available. So she would spend a lot of time talking to me and listening to me of bad choices in men. So she said to me, I think maybe you should go to in her beautiful French Dutch accent, because she also étudiait le français, and that was my major, by the way, in French.
Yes,
So,
my favorite language in the world.
oh, it's so beautiful. Yes. So she said to me, I think you should go to therapy. I go there for my survivor guilt. And because of that, because I admired her and I didn't want to think there was anything wrong with me, but I did know that I was still single at 35 and had no idea how people got into relationships. What I really needed to do was to get in a relationship with myself and stop beating myself up for things that I had done, like left private school to go home. My parents were very upset about that. About me coming home, and I was just missing my home, and so there's a lot of stuff that happened that I did talk to them about before they died. And my mother hence said that.
So you were able to reconcile all of that with them before they passed on.
Yeah, and they were human beings. My father, I'm sure, was changed in World War II because as a bomber pilot, he saw his friends die, and so yeah, I just had to be to the point where this basically my play, the fifth play that I'm writing is a story of redemption, how we are all redeemable no matter how many mistakes we make, or because I was really spiritually lost before I went to therapy and then went to programs for friends and families of alcoholics, 12-step programs.
Do you think, listening to you there a minute ago, do you think that Eva in some way found a kindred spirit in you? One, you were the first person to break that barrier of sending her the Happy Hanukkah card and therefore not making it overtly obvious her Jewishness, which I don't know why what reasons she had for not feeling that she could tell people or pronounce it to the world what her ethnicity was. But do you think the fact that sometimes a problem shared is a problem halved, and the fact that you had your own problems and she was there for you, that in some way she was feeling, well, other people are suffering and I can be there for them, so it was actually making her feel that she wasn't alone in suffering, I suppose in silence, because when you're, I presume when you're the child of alcoholic parents, however functioning they are, there's a lot of secrecy among your friends.
Yeah.
So you and Eva had that in common, this secrecy.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's a really perceptive point. Yes. And also, she, I think, kind of was taking me on as being her adopted daughter in a way. So I'll just give you, I think this is kind of funny. There's a book years ago written, very famous bestseller book, right, called I'm Okay, You're Okay. You're probably familiar. Well, one time when my mother was struggling trying to figure out what to do with her gifted child, and they sent me away a lot. They sent me to France to live with a French family, which was wonderful. They sent me to private school, which was okay the first year. Second year, I got homesick. Anyway, the point is that the she, it has been presumed by therapists that she just didn't know what to do with this very smart child. I think she was afraid that bright, pretty women didn't necessarily get very far, especially ones who wanted to be an actress. I think she was afraid I'd end up in some brothel in New York City or something, because I always wanted.
So she sent you to France.
So she sent me to France. No, that was much younger. But what I'm trying to say is that she said, thank God you live in Boston now. Okay, so I'm now with Eve, and Eve really did understand. So, but here's something I wanted to tell you. She also felt like, I think, that she wanted to be my mother in a way, because she pointed out that my parents never visited me when I was up in Massachusetts at private school. So she would say these things that were a little bit hurtful, right? I really didn't want to be reminded that, but she said, but Ezra and we came to see you. It's like, okay, they lived in Boston anyway. So one time she said I just want to start with this story about the I'm okay, you're okay. My mother, is going through menopause and having her child 6 and 7 living at home, I think to her dismay, thinking that they would be off at private school, and where, her other friends had sent their well-educated. My father's very successful. He was a millionaire with his chemical air filter company. And a wonderful member of the society, etc. So everybody was looking good, and Anyway, so they sent me away. The point is that, so when I came back, my sister came back as well. They sent her to Switzerland. She didn't last very long, but so they, they were having troubles. So when I moved to, I mean, at that time in my life, my mother went to a seminar about the book I'm Okay, You're Okay. I did write notes, by the way, about it. So anyway, I'm okay, you're okay. And when she came back, I said, how'd you like the book, Mom? And she said, it wasn't very good. Or how was the seminar? Not good, she said. I said, why? She said, because I'm not okay and neither are you. That's what she said.
There seems to have been a lot of guilt with your mother, and I suppose sending you away and sending your sister away was in a way, I suppose, trying to distance herself from what she saw as probably her failure as a mother. And
well, you know who actually made that decision was Dad. Dad was making all those decisions at the time, where we were going to go to college, what we were going to do. He was like, the father knows best. But I think it was hard for Mom because she said, but I won't be able to visit her if she's in Switzerland. And my father said, that's the point. So, my mother told me much later in life that she didn't really have decision-making power. She was not a feeble wallflower or anything, but she did have certain restrictions placed upon her by her father that she did not feel she could break. You do what your husband tells you to do. You're a good wife. You make my grandfather wrote a letter to her about how keep your children well dressed and fed and make sure you have a drink for your husband when he comes home from work and, looking good and all this stuff. So I just wanted to point out, though, I just on this theme of I'm okay, you're okay. I get to Boston, my Aunt Eve and I are having long talks. And one day she says, do you want to go to Walden Pond? Let's go swimming. So we go to the beach and I have this one-piece bathing suit on and a coverlet. And I take my coverlet off, about to go swimming. And she in a bikini, skinny as hell, as my mother would say, is sitting there looking elegant. And she looks up at me and says, she looks up and down at my body, your family talks about you like you are obese. But you are not obese. You are okay. You are okay. It's exactly what she said.
You wouldn't want to be sensitive.
So years later, right, at a comedy show, I decided to say something. This was not true. What I told the audience was, and I said, my family talks about you like but you're okay. You're okay. And of course, I didn't speak it.
That's like, Elizabeth, it's like art imitating life. It's amazing how many people in the world of theatre or whatever, or writing, are able to draw on those characters in their lives, whether, the functioning alcoholics, if you like, of parents, and your aunt who was, as you say, and someone who suffered from survivor guilt. But I was speaking with a woman yesterday who was a Holocaust survivor. She was a baby in her mother's arms when a Nazi actually saved them from going to Auschwitz and send them instead to a ghetto in Hungary. And she was only a few months old at the time. But she was saying that it's amazing how Holocaust survivors and their children are very blunt. You'll often find that they'll say things straight out. As she said to me, she was very funny. She received an MBE from the Queen, but she said to me, "We don't. There's no point in pussyfooting around. Just get to the point and say it." And we had a good laugh about it, because the idea, I've met several and I've spoken to many, and the one thing they all have in common is this absolute honesty. This straightforwardness, that when they say something, that their life is too short to waste with decorating it. Yeah, just say it as it happened.
Exactly.
And Eva sounds very like that.
She was, and she was also someone who, she definitely she set her boundaries. I really respected the fact that she didn't always answer questions. If people asked her something that was nosy, she just wouldn't answer. I thought it was so like, oh, you don't have to answer people's questions. She also said to me, so I'm really grateful to my Aunt Eve, by the way. And I didn't say anything to her at the time. I just jumped in the water and felt a little embarrassed because there was gossip. You know, one of the things that happen in a dysfunctional family, you compare yourself to somebody else, or you're told you're to do this or to that, whatever. Too smart for you. So um, I loved my Aunt Eve, and before she died, she said, "You know, you have a beautiful voice, but it is not trained. You should go to Langy School of Music, but you cannot afford it." And then she hung up the phone, and I was living in Dorchester, and I was so mad, right? Well, when she died, she left me money at this wonderful law firm. I say wonderful because they were just, they called me up and they said, your Aunt Eve has left you, an inheritance or whatever. So she left me money, and I used that money to go to Langy School of Music, and they told me to take my talent seriously and to sit up straight and straighten up and fly right. Straighten up and so I've been a professor. I left my job. So she died in 1997. In 1998, I left my job at Boston Edison Company. I started singing professionally with degree in French, no music degree except for those 2 classes I'd taken at Langy. It's an opera, it's an opera school. It's like, I sang pop songs. So it's actually really exciting. I bought my own sound system. And I'm just telling you all this because Eve was really my salvation. She's the only one who ever told me that I was actually okay, that it was okay to be smart. It was okay to be this or that. You know what I mean?
You were okay to have the body you had, okay to have the voice you had. You were okay to be you. She accepted you 100% for the way you were. And we can all only hope to find somebody in our lives that will accept us 100% for the way we are.
Yeah.
One person in life that actually accepts you as you are. But I reckon she saw a lot in you that kind of mirrored her own life. Certainly when she came
both
to
were
America.
isolated in a way. We were isolated, right? She lost her family, and I did too, in a way. My mother, and I loved her. I was always wishing she would pay attention, spend some time with me, and my mother, I knew I would watch, as a child, you look and you see that they're overwhelmed. They don't know what to do with us, as children. But one of the things my mother did say was that you're going to go far. She didn't say where I was going to go or how I was going to go.
What mode of transport you were going to use.
Maybe on a donkey, but no. But
there's a saying here in Ireland: if somebody tells a joke, oh, you're hilarious, you should be on a stage. The next one out of town.
I haven't heard that one. I did hear one from my brother-in-law when I was singing at an assisted living center, and I told him that, it's one of my first gigs. I was so excited. And he said, of course they love you. They're medicated. They can't get out of the room and they can't hear. At the time, I was really angry but now I do think it's funny. But that's because I have sung at other places, where people that.
But you can draw on all of that. You can draw on all of that for your writing and for your. I haven't started writing yet, fictional or creative writing, because everything that I've read for the last forever seems to be Holocaust books, and you can't seem to. I was speaking to this woman yesterday, and she was saying, I'm so honest. She said, I feel like, she said, all these Holocaust fictional writers would probably be sticking pins in my photograph now, because she's very much against fiction in relation to the Holocaust. I personally think there's a space for it, because it's a way of bringing younger people in without traumatizing them too much with reality. You can hold back some, but I would love to be in a stage now where I could write creatively, and maybe something like Harry Potter or something like that, or a play. I'd love to do a piece. I'd love to do a play on my research. That's
Oh
what
my
I'd
gosh, you should, I would love to see you do that because yeah, you've got so much material and research. I have, by the way, records from the Holocaust Museum of my Aunt Eve. Her name was Eva Louise Cohen, and I want to write. I need someone to translate from her German. She wrote forms in German, so she spoke French, German, and English, of course, and Dutch.
and
So she was pretty amazing. But yeah, but she also was kind of shut down emotionally. One of the things that happened one time, I was late to arrive at her flat, the fifth floor of the Beacon Hill, a lovely brownstone, which when it was sold for millions and millions of dollars. So, but the point is, I rang the bell and I came up the flight, and she opened the door just a crack. She said,
you're
I
late.
thought, I thought we were going to have a meeting at something like 10:45. It is 11 o'clock. Am I wrong? I'll never forget the way she said, "Am I wrong?" And I went, "No, no." And and I'm just talking fast as I had learned to do growing up. Like, so I'm like, "No, no, I'm sorry." And I was never late again, never late. After I apologized, then she let the door and then she let me in. So, but I thought, good for her. She has these.
No, she could only say that to you because she knew she could only say that to somebody or speak like that probably to somebody that she knew wouldn't take offense. Or probably she was the type that wouldn't care whether you took offense, she'd probably say it anyway.
Well,
She just,
that, and I think, I learned lessons from her. Like, her time is valuable, my time. She would say to me, your parents are coming to Boston and they just want me to stop and drop everything. And, she didn't put it quite like that. But she's like, I have appointments, and I'm like, oh, really? You have boundaries? Like,
it's like several people I know, all in my family, down through the years, people I've come across, and yeah, it's they're and they're Irish. Do you know that it's amazing? It's amazing that the similarities that there is between, say, the Irish mother, the Jewish mother, and I suppose all uh, ethnic people, also small people from, I suppose, here in Ireland, we suffered through the famine,
oh,
and
no.
and then of course the Holocaust for Jewish people, and I don't know what it is, whether it's the Italian mother, the Jewish mother, and the Irish mother. They're all obsessed with their sons, and they're all obsessed that everything is around the home, and everything's around food, and they're always they're definitely strong. I suppose I'm probably exaggerating here. Not everyone is like this, but they're all strong matriarchs.
Mm-hmm.
You
Yep.
know, and they have no. They don't seem to have any filter. They'll say straight how they're thinking. And I don't know what it is about, in particular, the Irish, the Jewish, and the Italian mothers, but there seems to be a similarity all the way. Especially, you look at movies and that of or American, New York Italian mothers, and you might as well. I mean, do you remember the series years ago, Rhoda?
Yep. Yep.
And you look at Rhoda Morgenstern, and you listen, and you could almost be hearing your own mother inside in the kitchen bellowing orders. And I always found it fascinating, the similarity between the three ethnic, or the three groups of people, and the women at the very top of the family, if you
Yep.
like,
Yep.
almost more powerful than the men.
Yep. Yep.
And
Yep.
ruled the roost, if you like. But how did you get interested in and going down the arts and not languages, for instance? Because languages would have
Well,
been, I would imagine, that was your first. But then again, it comes back to, I suppose, your love of music as well. It's all to do with sound.
interesting. Yes, well, thank you. And third grade teacher showed us an aerial view of Paris, and he mentioned that across the ocean there was a language people were speaking that, and I could break the code, and my brothers wouldn't understand a word I was saying, and I would have this all to myself. So I learned French, and he was a wonderful teacher. His name was Mr. Deal. He's passed away now, but I was able to call him in Pennsylvania, thank him for what he did, his enthusiasm. And then when I went to private school, which was called Dana Hall School, a very fine school, my first year, I loved the studies. I was sent away to Massachusetts, and as my father said, to give him a good education because he also went to private school, Tabor Academy. The point is, there I am, Madame Bernstein. It's French class, and she's A-U-I-O-U over and over, très, très intelligent, très strict, très discipliné. So much so that little Phoebe started crying and ran out of the room. But I'm like, I got attention. I got attention for doing well, and I have been blessed with
I was that child. I liked the tough teacher because, and I liked attention.
Yeah. So I got attention for being
I was
smart.
an only child of an only child.
Oh, really?
Anyone that gave me attention, I loved them.
Now, did your mom and dad give you attention, or was the teachers?
Oh yeah, overly. Oh, yeah, that's the problem. That was a problem at times. You couldn't blame anybody else for anything wrong. They knew if something was broken, Mary did it. So couldn't get away with anything, and they were overly protective. Overly, well, in particular, my mom. So when you went to school and you had a nun, I had all nuns, and I had a nun, and the nuns, I loved all of them because I just loved them, and they didn't know quite what to do with me. One in particular used to send for my mom regularly about all the questions I was asking, and she couldn't answer, and I wasn't satisfied with the answers, and I'd hold the whole class up until I'd actually get an answer I was satisfied with. Mm-hmm. And she used to go in, she said, to St. Michael every morning to pray just to get through a half an hour of Mary Honan's questions, because I had a captive audience at home.
Sure.
You'd always get an answer from my mother because there was only the two of us or my father. So yeah, I love the attention.
Yeah. Well, that's the answer to your question is, why did I do it? Why did I do it? Because I got to finish a sentence. I got to finish a song. People actually paid me to do it instead of paying me to shut up. So I loved it, and nobody ever paid me to shut up. But I joke around about that. But it's true. Like, I grew up in a big family. Dinners were fun and chaotic, and everybody was talking at once. And I remember holding my breath so that I could get a word in edgewise. And so now, two things I do is sing. Well, I got my voice actually, and so I really did have low self-esteem until I got into Al-Anon and figured out that, like,
it's amazing how many people in the arts will claim to have, and rightly so, low self-esteem or be incredibly.
Right. Well, I mean, I did have it. Okay. So I just wanted to explain that was in the past. Well, there are times, but most of the time I'm pretty confident now because people let me finish it. But the point is that, yes, I went in there and I found out I had low self-esteem, and my mother had low self-esteem, and it's kind of like, it's not okay to feel good about yourself. That's why I love that. I'm okay now. Like, I'm okay. So the point is that, that I got my voice in Al-Anon because I found out that the things that I was told about myself, or that I told about myself, that I didn't deserve to have this, only my mother did, or my brothers did, or whatever. I made up all these stories that I was a bad girl. When things happen, people fall down, nobody talks about it. As a child, you think there's something wrong with you because it's like they're not getting up. They're like, there were just a lot of tragic things that happened that made me think that it was my fault. So when I found out it wasn't my fault, I got my own voice, I spoke up, and then I started using it professionally because I had always been told. I mean, that's the thing. My parents never told me I could not sing. Nobody told me I could not do anything. They actually wanted me to just be happy. They just, they didn't guide me necessarily in one direction or another, but, we all have to find our own way. One of the best things that ever happened to me was one day I realized my parents were these two planets. They got together, and then they had 7 other planets, and those 7 other planets went off in their own orbit. And granted, we didn't stick together. We weren't a close family, but the point is we each had our own orbits to roll around in.
You bounced off each other as well as planets.
Not necessarily because my brothers went to Colorado and anyway, long story, my father gave his one company. My one brother is the one who has the company, nobody else involved with my father's company. Anyway, sort of like a divide and conquer.
Strange the way we were only talking about that the other day, I and a friend, about the way parents write their wills and leave almost singularly to one person, and they could have 4 or 5 more who get nothing because they happen to be either women or and certainly when it comes to land and things like that, the land is always nearly left
the man, right, or the firstborn.
whereas I, as a parent, I could never leave to one and leave, and if I had 4,
Right.
I would always have to split it between.
Yeah.
Well,
let me
I just find it strange the way some families do these things.
Yeah. Well, okay. So, people want what they want when they want it. My father had this baby of his and he was going to sell it. And my one brother apparently, the only one apparently, said, if you're going to sell it, why don't I buy it from you? And so Dad said to me, I have a son who's a captain of industry. Anyway, so he sold it to John. And I guess.
Oh, he sold it.
Yeah, to John. And John paid him within 10 years of time when the prophets. Anyway, all of this is story because the bottom line is they didn't leave me nothing. It's not like he will be the only one. That's a very dramatic story, but it's not true. The truth is we all got money. We all got our way in life. I got a French degree. I was a teacher for 2 years in a high school.
And you had your Aunt Eva.
And I had my Aunt Eve. Many, many things that were given to me. Exposure to, athletics and stuff like that. So I'm,
do you think that, I suppose through French and through your singing and through your stage work, that in some senses they became your voice? Because in many respects, when you sing a song, there's a start, a middle, and an end, and people will have to listen because they'll have to wait until the end of the song anyway, unless they throw something at you halfway through. And you have to exit the stage. And it's the same when you're performing something. People will generally sit through it and wait until you from the start, even if they're bored in the middle. They'll wait because they're too embarrassed to leave, but they'll still listen to you. And through your French, you had a language that you understood, so you could talk to yourself for hours. Nobody else understood, but you were quite happy. So through language, in some way, you have found a way of getting from start to finish without being interrupted.
There you go. I love the way you encapsulate all of this, and
Well, my PhD was in philosophy, so maybe it's you can't get out of it. I'm just a deep thinker.
It's wonderful.
Some people would call it paranoia, but I'm a real, I suppose, if you look at the work of Jacques Derrida, the French Albanian Jewish philosopher who founded deconstruction, and he believes that there's no such thing as anything. There's always hidden meanings. There's always the meaning that you can, if you write something, you can mean something with it, with what you've written. But I can take a completely different meaning from it. And when you read it, each time you or I read it, there can be multiple interpretations of it.
Yes.
And you bring your own life into every reading of it. So as you go along in life, that reading changes. Mm-hmm. It may have the writing of it may have been intended one way, but every single person that reads it finds some little thing that's different, a different interpretation. So that's what I actually like, is the fact that when people are talking to me, they might be talking about something mundane, but yet I can see that, there's different ways of looking at what they're saying. And that's what I was thinking all the time. You were talking about your French and your singing and your aunt's accent and your interpretation of her accent. and you all the stage. It's all language that has given you the ability to actually start come to the end of something without people interrupting you.
Yeah. It's also like my play is a story of redemption where I I really was spiritually lost for many, many years, and my heart was kind of frozen. And I opened up, as I began to process some of the things that happened, and go over the stories that I told myself. So it's it is a wonderful opportunity to create meaning out of life when a different kind of meaning, rewrite the story, or as they say, it's never too late to have a happy childhood. And it's not that I had a miserable childhood. Once I had a miserable youth. It's not true. But somewhere in my youth or miserable life, of course, that's very dramatic. I must have done something good for,
Oh, my favorite movie of all times.
Sound of
The
Music.
amount of dates I cancelled to watch that movie when we didn't have a means of recording it. I'd just ring up and say, "Can we do it tomorrow? Can we go tomorrow?" Because The Sound of Music.
I love it. Yeah, it's a great
I was
movie.
going to marry Christopher Plummer, Captain Von Trapp. I was 13, and then I was all from the age of 13 onwards. It was The Sound of Music, The Sound of Music. I've never got through my love.
I have to send you my full show, the whole show, Why Be Normal, because I only have a clip on the YouTube, but I have a Patreon page. The whole show is there because in there I weave songs from and my father was a captain of the Army Air Corps, and he did have 7 children. And until I wrote my play, I didn't even realize, like, he wasn't, and of course that song, a captain and 7 children, what's so fearsome about that? Well, I was in the family, and it was sometimes fearsome because Dad would say, we're not discussing this, and we'd be like, oh, okay, and so, but I mean, it was also exciting and wonderful, and we went on adventures, and we went skiing and sailing and swimming, and so it looked like a perfect family, and that's why I needed to get some help, and luckily my aunt
Therapy.
therapy, of course, and we didn't therapy in those days. If you went to therapy, you were crazy. So I'm like, oh my God! But I knew that Eve was not saying I was crazy, so I was open-minded enough to go, thank God, and get some help. And, but you learn that everything is about it is an experiment. Like this whole thing, being here, right, on this call. This is my first podcast, so I'm very excited. It's not my first interview, but I'm thinking, do I know how to do it? Oh my gosh, I have to get the Zoom call. And my husband bought me this light, which he was setting up, anxiously setting it up before the call. Which
I have the same one over me.
Okay, so it's supposed to,
Anyway,
we couldn't figure out how to put, but the whole readiness, like I'm ready, and maybe the thing is, you're probably never ready for anything. You just have to.
It's all to do with when you've been on stage. I spent 14 years as a principal dancer with Bunratty Castle Entertainers. Traveled the world with them. Danced for the Crown Prince and Princess of Japan. Which was hilarious because every time when we stopped, they stood and bowed, and we bowed, and they bowed, and I bowed. And then this went on for about 5 minutes because it was an absolute joke. And I could see the Irishmen at the table in the banquet had to put their drinks down because the Crown Prince and Princess had put their drinks, and no one could drink while they weren't drinking, and no one could eat, and you could see the Irishmen just taking big gulps in between because they might never get a drink again for the night. But I think once you've been on stage, and I've been dancing since I was 4 years of age, 3 years of age, and and it prepares you no matter for being thrown in at the deep end as you have been with a podcast and performing. and that's what you're doing now, is performing, because the minute the lights came on and I said press record, off you went.
Well, you made it possible. So thank you for allowing me to express myself. It is very exciting to be at this point in my life, and I'm 66, to say it's not too late because here's my goal, Mary, is to, in 2024, which is only 2 years from now, I will be singing in France. That's my plan, to sing in French as well as in English and add comedy and drama and, of course, singing. And it's going to be called The Betsy Show. Growing up, I was called Betsy. There were 100 cows and 100 people in Pennsdale, Pennsylvania, my hometown, the village.
And probably all of them were called Betsy at some stage because it's just.
There you go. The two got confused. Was I a cow? Were they?
Well, Eve thought you weren't. She thought you were just fine.
That's right. And Elizabeth being, which is why I've been Elizabeth for 21 years, even though my family wants me to go back to Betsy. But Elizabeth means consecrated by God. And the only reason I have that name is because some boss of mine, when I worked for the Department of Employment and Training in Massachusetts, she said, this was before I quit and became a singer, but she said, you people are, you're signing Elizabeth, and your Aunt Eve calls you up and says, Bitsy? She says, which are you? So I said, Elizabeth. I thought I'd get more respect if I was Elizabeth. So, but I love the name. It does mean more to me that I have come into Elizabeth, that God, my Aunt Eve told me to go to therapy. I went to therapy. I got help in 12-step programs, and God basically revisited me and let me know that he was actually a good, loving presence in my life, right? And I did, pray and ask God for forgiveness, and I found out I was already forgiven, and went to the Sistine Chapel in Rome. After my mother died, I got to go to Rome to a singing workshop.
Is there anything like it in the world apart from Notre Dame?
Yeah.
I just think the Sistine Chapel, I've just started putting up pictures in my house that I bought in the Sistine Chapel. They're A3, they're very large. They're about 2 feet tall, but I only got them framed this year for the first time. And I bought them in 2006 when I went with the art college to Rome, and just got them framed and painting the house, so the pictures are going up for the first time. But it was just an extraordinary experience walking into the Sistine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Like, well, we're worthy of redemption. And that's what my play's about. Yeah.
Well, Elizabeth, it's been an absolute extraordinary experience for me having you on. I feel like I say this to one or two people. I've said to one or two people, I feel like I've known you forever.
Thank you so much. Well,
and I wish you every success with everything you're doing and with the Betsy Show in 2000. And what's the other one called? Why Be Normal When You Can Be Extraordinary?
Well, I've actually done 5 shows, but this one is called The Betsy Show coming up. And then I did The Betsy Patsy, where I compared myself to the famous Patsy Cline. So that's the show that's been written and has already been produced. So it lives on. Anyway, the point is, so 2024 is when I'm still writing The Betsy Show. I want to add more comedy and just being true to myself about the purpose of the show. I have people I'm working with who are amazing from a company called Distinctive Voices, and they're helping me write it. So I'm looking forward to getting a stage. I want basically probably I'll be putting the show on in stages, so to speak, the stage of Chicago, Boston, New York, Philadelphia, wherever, and then go to Paris. That's the plan. So it feels very, what is the word, audacious.
My favorite place in the world, France.
Well, so I want to get to know you more and want to find out how you started the podcast, but I realize the time is up, right? So I hope to talk to you some more.
Well, we can. I can sign out, and we can talk after I've ended the show. Shindera Leshan Clor, that's the end of the show for today. Until the next time, Lacuna of Day. Walam tu galer chiacona sonus agus gro. I wish you peace, happiness, and love. Agus Gadeship Sloan. Bye.
Bye. Shalom.
Shalom.
Beautiful.